Introducing you to people across North Carolina and around the world who put their Catholic faith into action. This is Faith Works on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Now, here's your host for Faith Works, Ellen White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Faith Works on Divine Mercy Radio. Our show highlights individuals through God's grace who put their faith into action daily. Amazing people who have an interesting, sometimes overlooked impact on our Catholic faith. On Faith Works, we share their stories. I'm your host, Ellen White. Welcome to Saints in the Making, where we explore the lives of holy men and women who inspire us in our journey of faith. This month, we highlight John of God, Francis of Rome, and I'm going to start that again. I didn't even say saints in there. Okay. This month, we highlight Saint John of God, Saint Francis of Rome, and Saint Margaret Clitherow, saints who show us mercy in action, holiness in family life, and courage in the face of persecution, reminding us that we are all called to become saints in the making. We're once again joined by Rob Agnelli, Catholic speaker, theologian, and longtime student of the saints, who will guide us through their lives and help us see how their witness speaks into our own call to holiness today. Welcome back, Rob.
Good to be back.
It's always a pleasure. I look so forward to these discussions, primarily because we choose them at random, and inevitably they come a knocking in various ways when I'm really reviewing them, and then even after. So my hope and prayer is that for those that might be tuning in, we'll have the same kind of encounter with these amazing men and women saints. All right, so let's start with Saint John of God, whose feast day we celebrate March 8th, which will be tomorrow when this is airing. It's the day after the air. Tell us a little bit about who he was, and then we'll get right into the meat of his story.
Yeah, so he left home when he was 8 years old, without any explanation, kind of just ran away, became a shepherd because he wanted to have a life of prayer and contemplation.
Where was he?
He was in Spain.
Okay.
And he has a great devotion to Our Lady, especially to the 24 years after the Ascension. So every day he would pray 24 Paters and 24 Ave Marias in honor of her. Eventually, he joins the army of Charles.
Wait. Say that again. 24 years?
Yeah, so tradition is that Our Lady lived 24 years after Christ ascended into heaven. And then there's like a special devotion. I think it's a very Spanish thing.
I have never heard this before.
Yeah.
Okay, so 24 years.
Yeah, so then he joins the army of Charles V, and he kind of slowly devolves into this life of vice among the soldiers. He gets sent off to go gather some food. He's knocked off of his horse. He's actually knocked unconscious, and he wakes up and he's realizing he's behind enemy lines and he's in trouble. And he's pretty much afraid of being captured. And so he begins to pray. And he prays to Our Lady, and all of a sudden he sees this beautiful shepherdess bringing him water. And so he asks her who she is, and she says, "I am she who you just invoked," and tells him in the midst of many perils, you're not safe unless you have recourse to prayer. And so she heals his wounds, and mostly the wounds of his soul, and kind of kicks him back onto the path to holiness. And from there, he sort of, once he puts his foot back on the gas, he goes. And eventually he's kicked out of the army. Providentially, he's accused of stealing provisions, which he didn't steal. And then he leaves the army, and he's journeying, and he sees a child that he doesn't recognize. And the child doesn't have any shoes. And so he offers the child his shoes, but they don't fit. And so he ends up carrying the child. And he carries him and puts him under a tree, and he goes and gets some water and comes back, and the child's holding this giant pomegranate that he breaks open And when he breaks it open, a cross comes out of it. And the child, who's obviously our Lord, says to him, John of God, at Granada, thou will find thy cross.
Well, okay. So, and I also, for context, I want to give the years. I don't think we gave the years for this, his life, did we?
I don't think so. No, I think we just talked about
it was 1495 until his passing in 1550. And I will never look at a pomegranate again. There's so many new things with this.
Yeah, so inside of it, it's
a cross.
Is a cross.
Okay.
And so he gets
Granada.
He gets this name. Jesus calls him John of God. That's where he gets his name from. And so he goes to Granada. And then he doesn't really know what to do. And so he opens a Catholic bookstore and kind of just hangs out until he figures out exactly what he's supposed to do there.
Wow. Okay. And there's some discussion. So obviously what changed him in this dramatic conversion was having this encounter with this child.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's really both, right? So it's first Our Lady.
Okay.
And then, having an encounter with Jesus.
Yes. Okay. And then there's something in his story about being committed to a mental hospital. Where does that kind of fall into play with?
So it's around this time when he first goes to Granada. What happens is, the saints tend to run in circles, right? And so he.
Why do you say that? What do you mean?
It just tends to be like, if you look back in history, saints are never isolated. There's always other saints around them. Mm-hmm. And some of it is like in this situation. So he meets St. John of Avila, and he hears a sermon from him, and he's given this vision of the real horror of sin. Mm. And so he covers himself in dirt and starts pulling his hair out, and people are like, okay, this guy's a nut. Mm-hmm. And so he falls at the feet of St. John of Avila and makes a general confession, but he's still acting like a total nut. And so they send him to an asylum. And what he's doing interiorly is he's decided that he's going to go to the asylum because he knows how they're going to treat him, and that's his penance.
His penance.
Suffering. Yeah, is to suffer in the asylum.
Mental hospital.
And because John of Avila, essentially, they become friends. And John of Avila goes and visits him and says, stop now. And he stops immediately, and he just starts ministering to the people in the mental hospital. So he had sort of handpicked his own penance. And then his, who became his friend and spiritual director essentially said that, that's a little much. And this is where he begins to sort of get a love for suffering people, because he's really living among them, and he lived like one of them. Mm-hmm. And that sort of has a profound effect on him.
So obviously this kind of approach takes a lot of charity and maybe self-awareness and selflessness. How did he go about doing this? Well, and I also want to know the time frame, Rob, that he was there in the asylum.
Yeah, it was a very short amount of time, probably less than a year.
Okay.
And so he has another sort of mystical experience where he's praying in front of an image of the crucifixion, and he receives his own crown of thorns from Our Lady and St. John. And with that, he immediately hears his calling to start a hospital, which he did right there in the middle of Granada. And so he dedicates all of his energy to serving the sick. And that's pretty much how he, for the next, that whole period of his life afterwards, that's pretty much how he serves, is through this hospital. And very interestingly, St. Raphael is assisting him all throughout. So people would see him, and St. Raphael would be disguised as St. John of God, helping the people. So he had this like assistant, and St. Raphael is the patron saint of healing. And so he sort of had developed this friendship with St. Raphael, who would assist him in the hospital.
This is phenomenal. Have you been familiar with him prior to?
No, this, I knew of him very, generically, right? As, this saint who had worked in the hospital and started the hospitalers. This is all kind of new to me.
Is the hospital still in existence there in Granada? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
That would be something interesting to check out. And crown of thorns, usually with people that have some form of stigmata, are found incorrupt. is that the case with St. John of God?
Yeah. When they, I think when he dies, there's this extraordinary light that is coming from his tomb. And then some 20 years later, they finally like exhume him. And at the time they found the body incorrupt. Okay. And they had like really the same smell, this like beautiful sort of flowery smell. I don't know if he's still incorrupt or not.
Okay.
But at the time when they first exhumed him, he was.
That's so fascinating. All right. And what do you think St. John would say, St. John of God would say to Catholics who prefer comfortable compassion that is, maybe at arm's length, or where you don't feel like you are offering a lot? I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, very, very often, right? Like, I think we can all sort of be guilty of this, right? Where we think about the poor people over there, right? Missing the fact that, when Christ commands us to love our neighbor, like he uses that word very specifically because why? Well, because your neighbor is the one closest to you, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so very often, I think that that's the thing we miss is that like God puts people in your path. You don't necessarily have to go find them. And so that's, not really what he did. He didn't go, like he went where Jesus told him to go, but he didn't immediately just jump in and go find some poor people. He waited till the Lord made it providentially very obvious what his call was. And I think that's mostly because what you have to do when you're ministering to people, right, is have a solidarity with them. So it can't be something that you just kind of, you touch over here and then you go off somewhere else. I think there has to be, because, ultimately you're only going to really be a source of healing, a source of evangelization, whatever, when you not just, come and preach to them and leave. It's when you're inserted in their life. And so that a certain level of trust and all of that has to be present.
Walking with, you've got to be walking alongside them. Yeah, and the trust is huge too. Okay. A quote of his, which is obviously relatable, is labor without stopping. Do all the good works you can while you still have the time. What would you say about that?
It's interesting how he dies. So he, for a long time, he lived a very ascetic life, gave and gave and gave at the hospital. And that eventually sort of, takes its toll on him. And so, as his life's coming to a close, St. Raphael lets him know when he's going to die. And he actually died from jumping into a river to save a boy. But in this case, the boy, he wasn't able to save him. And so, he carried a great amount of distress because of that. And so he returns back to the hospital, and he asks them to bring the Blessed Sacrament to him because he wants to die in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And they put it in a monstrance in front of him, and he's kneeling in front of it. And they're like, he's in there a really long time. And they go in, and he's dead on his knees. And so it. In the end, he dies like in front with Jesus, knowing that his time was short, and that's how he wanted to spend his last moments.
Okay, who I'm going to bring up in this instance, Monsignor Ingham.
Yeah, exactly. Same story.
Final hours.
Same story.
Somebody had brought the monstrance with the Eucharist in it, and he was in adoration of our Lord when he passed, and that was his dying wish, and he received it in spades. So, wow, St. John of God, this is amazing. All right, and something that I've added to these reflections on these saints, Rob, if you don't mind, is like a little personal challenge that has to do with each saint that we're going over, for me especially. But something that I wanted to add was with St. John of God is, where are we tempted to keep suffering at arm's length instead of, learning? I guess that at the start of it, it's praying to our Lord to help us accept the suffering and then to be able to carry our cross. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that sort of come to mind, especially when we're exposed to other people's sufferings. And I think with him, he wasn't afraid of it, right? And I think we are afraid of it because we don't feel equipped to fix it, right? So there's this tendency to want to fix other people's suffering, or to just be like, okay, this isn't that serious. You got to move on, right? Like we've talked about before. So, but I think we sometimes forget, like, compassion is not fixing the problem, but carrying the burden with the person. And so once we let go of our inability to fix the problem, which is about me, and then we can make it about them and about alleviating their suffering by either, carrying some of the sorrow or the shame or the difficulty of it, right? Because when you're in the midst of suffering, when someone else goes, yeah, I got your back, or I'm going to help you with this, or it immediately alleviates a little bit of it, right? It doesn't take it away. It doesn't, but I think it really is that little bit of embarrassment that I'm in front of this person and I can't fix their problem.
Acknowledging that even, and saying, I can't fix this for you, but I'm sorry that you're feeling this way, and praying for you and whatever I can.
Yeah, and I'm here, right? Like that's really what it comes down to. I'm here.
I think we've talked about this before, and it just popped into my mind. There was a particular story where someone had a family member that had died, and there was a priest that came, and he just kind of sat in the corner, and he was there for hours on end, didn't say anything, but just by his very presence there, it was so reassuring to his family. So that says a lot. Wow.
Yeah, and you have to be humbled to say, like, that, to sit there, right, and just go, I can't fix this. Like, but I'm going to be, I'm going to at least be here and be a present.
Beautiful. So beautiful. All right. St. Francis of Rome, we celebrate on March 9th. So just a couple of days later. And for context too, 1384 to 1440, she was a wife and a mother, a Roman noblewoman. Lots and lots and lots of little terms that go with this amazing woman. Tell us a little bit about her history. Yeah,
she was a wife and a mother and a noble woman, but didn't necessarily start out in that direction. Uh-huh. So she had this desire to enter the convent, and in fact, she even, secretly as a young woman, followed some of the rules of the cloister with her director's permission. And her father had promised her in marriage, and he was unwavering in his pledge. And so she pleaded with him, found him totally unmovable. She goes and prays to God to remove all the obstacles. And her director tells her that she has to take her father's will as if it's God's will. Right? And so the theme with her is obedience, right? And so once she heard this from her director, she goes back to her father, asks one more time, and he, still refuses to give his assent. And so she begs his forgiveness for resisting, and then joyfully accepted her vocation.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about obedience. And we've talked, I think, ad nauseum about that in the past, Rob.
Yeah.
And just letting it go. You know what? Elaborate on that a little bit, because when we are obedient to our superiors or those that have authority over us, it gives us a sense of freedom.
Well, it's not just a sense of freedom. It actually gives you true freedom.
Yes. Yeah,
right? Because it actually frees you up to be what you're capable of being and what God made you to be, right? Like you think about, not to get off on a tangent, but the whole question of authority in marriage and obedience in marriage. And like when a wife is obedient to her husband, that frees her to be the heart of the family, right? To love as only a mother can love, when she doesn't have to worry about the stuff that the man is supposed to worry about. Like that obedience frees her to be, to grasp the feminine genius and be a wife and a mother, which only she can do. But if she's trying to grasp it and grasp, her own authority and so we're, that's an example, but we're all like that, right? So if we will just let go and let the people who have responsibility for something take responsibility without getting in their way, then we're, like underneath them, we are free to be who God made us to be.
Well, getting in their way, but also allowing God to do the work in us. And I love, I think it was Pope John the 23rd, and we might have talked about this before too, Rob, but he was during a particularly challenging time for his papacy. He was just done. And it was really late one night. And he just said, Lord, I'm going to bed. It's your church. You take care of it. So it's the same with the surrender novena too. I give it to you, Lord. I surrender it all to you. Take care of it. And it's so good to be able to release it. All right. So St. Francis lived in Rome during war, plague, and instability. I think it's very familiar to us today.
That's for sure.
What would you say about that and her response to her vocation as a wife?
Yeah, so like historically living during like what is the Great Western Schism. So you have popes, anti-popes,
major confusion.
Popes leaving Rome. Rome is practically abandoned. Like there's literally wolves running through the streets, like real wolves, right? Like not just wild dogs, but wolves.
Right.
I think the population was something, less than 50,000. Like it had been pretty much abandoned. So her husband, Lorenzo, was a commander of the papal troops. And so there's battles between these popes and anti-popes. And eventually he's captured. And so they tell her that they will ransom him if she brings his firstborn son. Yeah. And so, like, of course, she's torn, right? And she goes and prays, and she has this image, not necessarily a vision, but just this image of Our Lady giving up her firstborn son. And so she agrees to give them her firstborn son, and she would get her husband back. Of course, God's never going to let things like that, again, the obedience and the
Abraham
the love.
And Isaac.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of go unrewarded. And so they go to take the son and the horse won't move.
Yeah.
And so the men are like, okay, this is a sign from God. We are not taking this kid. And so they return both her husband and her son back to her. And so, she has, there's a lot of suffering around, but she's also, she's a victim of it too. She loses 2 of her children to the plague. And what is really interesting about her is she never really, even though this came right to her and to her doorstep, she never really grew bitter or closed in on herself. She went to and found people that she could serve, for the sake of Christ and the gospel, and started a hospital. And, there's a famine going on and there's a lot of miraculous things going on with supplies and provisions. And, there's empty storehouses, and she finds out about them and she goes and prays, and then suddenly the storehouse is full. And so the Lord was very close to her and blessed most of what she was doing. But again, not without, her putting some skin in the game.
I really like what you said about she was never bitter and never despaired. Obviously, despair is not of the Lord. And she found people that she could serve. So obviously, when you're sitting and stewing and, oh, woe is me, it never amounts to anything that's good. And I've often thought about a dear friend who was going through some incredibly challenging times. And I loved her response. She waited on the Lord. She was active in her prayer life, and then things would start happening for her. Inevitably. Yeah. There was a certain period of time where she would just go and sit and pray in adoration. She's a frequent mass goer too. And it's such a beautiful witness of what we are called to do instead of, going in circles. So
and a lot of times what it comes down to, right, is we have a price to pay for God's patience. Right, like very often we are recipients of it, but there's also, there is suffering on our part because, we have to wait for God to do what He's going to do in His time, and He's very patient, and so we have to expect sometimes that we're gonna have to pay a price for His patience.
Well, and this just, I was just thinking about this yesterday because it was a reflection that was given in part of a pre-Lenten retreat that I was listening to. And it was basically encouraging the people that were listening to speak honestly in our prayer to our Lord, even though we know we're supposed to be waiting. Maybe express your frustration. Come on, what are you doing? And have that, dialogue.
Yeah, very often I think people are afraid to do that. Yes. But if you read the Psalms, like there's a whole set of lamentations.
Yes.
Right. And lamentations is a nice word for, kvetching, right? Like I'm complaining to the Lord, right? It's, and it's good for you. It is like, again, I mean, the Psalms give us a model. Yeah. Give us a model for how we're supposed to do that.
I love it.
But we can't forget that like lamentations are a real form of prayer. And of course they should always end in hope. That's what it shows us.
I like that. Yes.
But there's nothing wrong with complaining to the Lord. Like, it shows you care as long as it ends in hope.
Wow. Okay. If you're just tuning in, this is Ellen White with FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. And today I'm joined, as always, with Rob Agnelli as we reflect on the saints we honor in March. St. John of God, St. Francis of Rome, and St. Margaret Clitherow. We're exploring their lives, their virtues, and the lasting impact they continue to have on the life of the church. And we are grateful for our show's sponsor, Thales College. Okay, so continuing our conversation about St. Francis of Rome. Wow. How did she balance, Rob, this deep mystical prayer that she experienced with domestic duties? I mean, that's got to be hard.
Yeah. Well, some of it is, again, God put someone in her path. So she had when she went to her husband's home with his family, his brother was married to a woman who, she didn't know it at the time, but she had the same exact desire that St. Francis had. She wanted to be a cloistered nun also. And so she meets her and she pulls her aside and she kind of walks her through, how do you do this? Like, how do you strive for holiness and be a wife? And so, the two of them, became fast friends. And in the end, when St. Francis starts like the convent, her sister-in-law Vanazza is one of the ones who goes with her. But God put this person and sort of showed her, okay, you have this deep desire for holiness. I'm going to show you how to live this out in the vocation of marriage.
Is it something that we can read and reflect on today?
Yeah, I mean there are several biographies of Saint Francis of Rome that talk a lot about their relationship.
And a good reminder too that you get a lot of your information from these beatification ceremonies for the saints.
Yeah, so some of the saints that have been, either beatified or canonized in the past, maybe like 100 years, you can usually find the homilies for them, which are very telling, because what it is really a summary of why the church picked them to be saints.
And they go through this long, arduous process.
Yes.
Okay, so what does St. Francis of Rome teach us about holiness in ordinary life, would you say, Rob?
So for her, the temptation always was to be something that she wasn't, which is, I think, that's, all of us, and this is the danger of studying the lives of the saints, is we try to replicate someone else's life rather than the life we're called to here and now, right?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point.
And so I think for her, obedience is what rescued her from that. But she really had to learn how to, because she thought, okay, the best way for me, to be, free of the world is to actually be free of the world. And God was like, no, like, you're a noble woman. You're going to get dressed up and you're going to go to these parties and you're going to elevate the women around you, which is really what she did. And, told her essentially, don't be scared of the world. I have overcome the world, right? So, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And so she had to learn how in the sort of pursuit of just daily life, how you cannot compartmentalize. And that's so much what we try to do. Like, holiness is wholeness. So we have to have everything integrated together as one person. And much of life is figuring that out. But if you run away from it and try to pretend you're something that you're not, you'll never get there.
Wow. You're hitting it out of the park today, Rob. Yes. So what can I say to that? I can say it's important that we are present in the moment that we're in and we are authentic to ourselves, who we are, and continuing down that process of understanding who we are, and being honest. And also, I love that you said holiness is wholeness and not, what did you say? Compartmentalizing?
Well, yeah, compartmentalizing our life. I mean, it is, I think, like, this is the big temptation, is disintegration, right? Where we are pulled apart, which is, the very word, like, diabolic means to pull apart, right? And whereas, Diabolos is the one who pulls apart. And so
divide.
Yeah. If you can have your, like the division within your own person. And so you have to strive to be one person. And like a lot of that starts with integrity, but also like accepting who you are, accepting who God made you to be and being okay with that. And that's not to accept our brokenness. That's to accept God's plan for who you are.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. In all humility.
Yep.
All right. A quote. Obviously, this is going to relate to what we talked about with St. Francis of Rome. A married woman must, when called upon, leave her devotions to God at the altar to find him in her household affairs. What do you say to that?
There's a beautiful story about her that really, maybe this might quote me even not come out of it, but she, she would try to escape to pray whenever she could. And so there's this one story about where she's praying the little office of the Blessed Mother, and she gets called away 4 times in the same exact line of one of the Psalms. And she just dutifully goes. And so she comes back the 5th time and picks the book back up to pick up right where she was. And now the words are written in gold. And so she knew, like, okay, there's this, again, integration of prayer in my vocation. This is what it looks like. And that's okay. Like, she didn't get frustrated. She didn't, tell her kids 5 minutes. She just went.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's something I got to take to heart. Excuse me, I'm doing my morning prayers. Can you give me a minute, please? All right. So how do we grow in holiness without escaping our vocation would be a good personal challenge for us, especially me, to reflect on. Be present. Wow. Okay. So switching gears to Saint Margaret Clitherow, whose feast day we celebrate on March 26th, 1556 to 1586. She was young. English wife and mother during persecution. And, I don't want to give it away. So tell us a little bit about her young life.
Yeah, she's in England during the time of Queen Elizabeth I. She's brought up in a Protestant household. And at the time, Elizabeth was demanding that that people would personally recognize her as head of the church. So she marries a Protestant butcher when she's about 18. And then within 3 years, she becomes a Catholic. And at the time, there's quite a price for being Catholic. At least initially, they were fined for not going to Protestant services. But as time went on, certainly the consequences became way worse. And so she was very private and prudent, knew how to fly under the radar, but not without compromise. And so she didn't compromise her faith, and she did all that she could. She just didn't do it in a very ostentatious way. And it was actually, she had sent her son, I think, to France for education, which is what got her sort of on the radar. So she's doing something for her son. At the time, it was illegal to send your kids out of the country for education because they knew, what they were sending them for, because the Catholic education had sort of fallen apart. And so this sort of, all she really wanted to do was make sure people had the sacraments. And so she opened up her home to priests, and she would have, house the priests. She would have mass in her house, and ultimately that's what sort of got her in trouble.
Where is this in England? What's the location?
She is from York, which is a little bit, maybe more than a little bit it's in the northern part of England.
Okay. And large home, small home, like little niches in her. I'm trying to visualize.
Yeah, I actually tried to visualize it too. But, assuming her husband was, pretty wealthy, and she was hiding, like, they had to pretty much tear the house apart when they found the vestments and the altar bread. So, I assume, she had ways of hiding stuff. I don't necessarily know how that she was hiding it, though, maybe in her floorboards or something like that.
And husband's response to this?
So he is a mystery. So
okay.
He remains ignorant of what she's doing, but nevertheless, never really pushes her to go to Protestant service. He pays the fine for her not going. So, the assumption is that he knew what was going on, but didn't know the specifics so that he wouldn't get in trouble. And you would see that very often at that time with the fathers, because, they would have to, if they didn't go to Protestant services, pretty much their business would get run into the ground. So they wouldn't be able to feed their family. And so what they would normally do is pay the fine for their wives and kids, and then they would convert, hopefully on their deathbed. In this case with her husband, John, it's not clear. He never converted, but it was clear that he didn't want to put an obstacle in her way. And so he just seems to be one of those, it's probably like for her, she's talking to a lady in prison before she died. That was her greatest, like, sort of regret, was that because it really is like his brother became a priest, and it's really his brother that converts her. And so it's a very strange,
setup.
Yeah.
So percentage-wise, too, Rob, I'm trying to visualize what the number of priests are during this time and what they had been. Do you know? Yeah.
So,
any idea?
English priests, not very many.
Okay.
So what was going on mostly was, the Jesuits had essentially started a seminary just to send them to England. And so most of these guys knew that if they got sent to England, they were going to die. Wow. And so they would go and, they'd go incognito and hide, but they would, to bring the people the sacraments, because, the faith, right before Elizabeth, there was a Catholic monarch. And so they knew that, like, the faith was still somewhat alive, but, it's only a generation away from being gone. Right. And so they were really careful about trying to preserve that.
And you got to repeat that again, because some that are tuning in might not have ever heard that phrase before, that we're only one generation away from.
Yeah, I mean, the church is indefectible, so it's not like the faith can be totally lost. But within a culture, and this is why sometimes we forget, like, why it's so important that you educate your children in the faith, because, and that's why capturing the culture is so important, because they sort of then immerse themselves in it without even realizing it. And so, when you hear that expression, it's mostly meant to be that typically the ebb and flow of, the vibrancy of the faith in a place really just goes from generation to generation. And so if you do a good job of passing the faith on to the next generation, then, it's a vibrant culture. If you don't, then, it's probably going to be at least, a generation or two before it gets restored.
I think it sounds familiar in a lot of places in the world right now. Okay, so she was found out. Tell us what happened.
So she found out. So a neighboring child essentially shows the authorities where the vestments are, and so they arrest Margaret and her servants. But what they can't figure out, though, is, so they arrest her, and she's perfectly at peace when she's being questioned by the council. She's bright, cheerful. And they think she's a little bit nuts, right?
This seems to be a recurrent theme.
But then the sort of rank and file are like, okay, God is on her side, and so she stands before the tribunal, and they essentially are, trying to get her to get a jury trial, and she insists that, they judge her, and she says, having made offense, I don't need a trial, but if you want to try me, that's fine, and she wanted them ultimately to be responsible for her death. She knew where it was going. And they were very hesitant because they kept telling her, like, no, if you go to a jury, they'll let you go. And she's like, well, why don't you just let me go? And ultimately, she just, steadily refused. And then, they sort of acted like their hands were tied and then, ordered her to be crushed to death.
It's interesting, too, that she refused to enter any kind of plea and just let it kind of play out.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other reason why she does that is because she does not want her children to testify, right? So what she was doing, if she goes to trial,
she was protecting.
She gives them access to her children, right? And she does not want that for them at all, because most of this for her at this point, right, is protecting the faith of her children. Because what she's taught them, right, is that, faith comes above all else. Like, God comes first, right? Because one of the things they would accuse her of is like committing suicide or abandoning her family. And she was doing, neither one, right? And so when you're animated by the virtue of hope, you realize, for St. Margaret, she's like, I'm a far better mother from heaven than I am, on earth. Right. And so she's okay with it. And in fact, her daughter becomes a nun and her two sons end up becoming priests.
Oh my goodness.
And so their faith was like really impacted by her, and not to mention just the amount of graces that she poured down on them by willing to, go all the way to death, right?
Yeah, well, and she protected priests knowing that it would cost her life. What kind of faith produces that kind of courage?
Yeah, I mean,
it's not overnight.
Yeah, no, it's not overnight, but it you know what it is? I think it's the faith, first of all, that believes in the sacraments. Because that's all it is, right? Like she realizes, I cannot be saved without the sacraments. These people cannot be. So she's not trying to, be this, great evangelist. She's just like, I know what saves people. It's the sacraments. And so, whatever that costs, I'm going to make sure like that comes about. And so that firmness, that is courage, and of course she's benefiting from it, right? Like if you think about, like, what lengths would you go to get the sacraments? Like, hopefully we would all do the same thing, right? But it's really just a faith in the saving.
You would walk through the snow and the ice to get the Eucharist.
Yeah.
I wonder, I don't know. This is something that I've pondered for a long time, and I'm so glad I'm able to ask this question with St. Margaret. Would we recognize persecution if it came gradually, slowly, or if it just hit us?
Yeah, well, so I think it's funny. I think if you look historically, right, the persecution comes slowly and then all at once. Like that's the model of it, right? So it tends to be that you don't recognize it, and then one day you wake up and you're like, oh, wait a second, this is actually either full blown or here it comes. And so I think the key is, I don't think we're attuned to recognizing the slowness of it, like the frog boiling in the water. Mm-hmm. But I think what it does tell us is, like, don't be complacent and never take your foot off the gas, right? And we should just, like we talked about, be willing to suffer for God's patience, but never for our own passivity, right? And sometimes we have to put skin in the game in order to do that.
Yeah, sometimes, a lot of the times we have to put skin in the game. Yeah. Pick up that shovel.
Yep.
All right, so what do you think, Rob, real spiritual courage looks like now? How would you describe that?
I think it's really now. I remember Pope Benedict, I think it was before he became Pope, he had a homily about, he was talking about the crisis of faith, and he said, actually, it's not a crisis of faith, it's a crisis of hope. And so what he was, his point of that, right, was like, and St. Margaret's a good example, she knew God would deliver on his promises, right? Like, and that's hope, right? So to go, like, if all this seems to be going on, but I know that if I'm faithful, he will protect my children. And I mean, that's really hope, right? So she, even in the midst of fearing for her life, she just overcomes that fear. And so I think what it looks like is exactly that, is to just that sort of radical sort of anchoring ourselves in hope, and not trading freedom for safety, which is, I think, the number one cause of like the sort of lack of zeal in the world today is a love of safety.
Not say that again.
Do not trade freedom for safety.
Yeah.
Never do that.
That's so great. All right. And she's quoted as saying, when she's responding to harboring priests, that she did it to save my soul. Explain that.
Yeah, I think that's just going back to the motivation about the sacraments, right? She knew, like, that's literally true, right? Mm-hmm. It's not, again, it's not, you could read that in the Protestant way of like, oh, look at this. Like, it's she's thinking about works. No, she's thinking about the sacraments.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. So personal challenge, unless you have something to add about St. Margaret, what would you add for that? Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
A personal challenge with her would be, what does Saint Margaret, teach us about raising children in a hostile culture? For me, it starts with the sacraments for sure. I can't do the things that I do without frequenting the sacraments. They're so important.
Yeah, and the other thing I would mention is for her that what becomes very obvious if you sort of trace what was going on with her. So that they kept sending these Protestant preachers to her in prison to kind of just get her to recant. They're like, oh, can't you just listen to a sermon? You don't have to agree with it. Just listen to it. And I think it's what it's a reminder of, and it sort of fits with what you were saying earlier about the sort of slowness of persecution, is you really can't compromise. Like, you have to know that you can't compromise on certain things. And so really, that's what she did. She was like, no, I can't compromise on that. That's a compromise. That's a compromise. That's a compromise. Because none of the things were, really necessarily, in and of themselves, you could probably have rationalized them, right? But she's like, no, that's a compromise. And it goes back to what we talked about integrity, right? Like, the person of integrity never compromises.
Wow. Okay. So we've got Saint John of God, Saint Francis of Rome, and Saint Margaret Clitherow. Wonderful saints and wonderful witnesses of what it means to live out our faith daily. And my prayer for you is that you can be present in the moment and reflect on Christ's presence with you right now and be authentic and be truly who God has intended for you to be. Thank you so much, Rob. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Insight and depth you always bring to our conversations. It's fantastic. Okay, if you missed any part of this episode or want to catch up on past conversations filled with inspiration and hope, you can find them all at divinemercyradio.org. Just click on local shows. And don't forget, you can take Faith Works with you wherever you go. Just download the free Divine Mercy Radio app from your app store. Again, simply search Divine Mercy Radio NC and you're all set to listen anytime, anywhere. Saints John of God, Francis of Rome, and Margaret Clitherow, pray for us. God bless.